Hi, my name's Paul Grogan, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you how to play Frostpunk the board game. Frostpunk the board game is set in a post-apocalyptic 19th century world where what remains of humanity struggles to survive living in small settlements around a generator, which provides the only heat in the freezing temperatures. The game is fully cooperative and can be played by up to 4 players, with each player taking on the role of an advisor, making important decisions to try and win the chosen scenario. In this video, I'll be explaining how to set up the scenario A New Home, using the Crater map layout. For other map layouts and other scenarios, refer to the scenario book for the full details of how these work and any special rules. Thank you to Glass Cannon Unplugged for sponsoring this video, but I also rely on the financial support of my Patreon campaign to keep the channel going. So if you want to support me directly and help me continue to make videos, you can do so by becoming one of my Patreon supporters at patreon.com/gamingrules. For this video, I'm going to be using the upgraded components that come with the Frostlander expansion. If you don't have these, just use the normal components instead. Place the generator tile in the middle of the play area. Place the generator with the drawer on the generator tile. Keep the generator upgrade in the box for now. It may be needed later in the scenario. The generator tile has 2 buildings pre-printed on it, the platform and the generator building. Place the cookhouse here. You have access to these 3 buildings at the start of the game. The reason why the cookhouse is not pre-printed is that whilst it's used in every scenario, it is sometimes in a different place. Place 5 wood and 5 coal on the spaces of the generator tile as depicted. Take the 6 rimboard pieces that look like this and ensure that they are showing the side with the cliff face. Connect them together to create the rimboard around the generator tile. Take the 7 starting wall tiles and shuffle them. Choose any corner of the rimboard and place one of the starting wall tiles chosen at random face up on the corner. Repeat this process for each of the corners of the rimboard, going clockwise until you have placed a total of 3 tiles depicting either coal or wood. You should now have deposits on 3 of the corners, and the other 3 should either be blank tiles or empty. Return the blank tiles along with any tiles not chosen to the box. Place the wood, coal, steam cores, trees, citizen meeples and automatons beside the board in an area known as the bank. Separate the map tiles into 2 stacks based on their backs. Shuffle each stack separately and place them face down nearby. On each corner of the map where there is no coal or wood deposit, place a far tile face down like this. Since there are 3 empty corners, that means that you will place 3 tiles. Then place a near tile face down between each of the far tiles and the generator tile. Flip over the map tiles you just placed. It's recommended to orient them in the same direction as the generator tile. Each tile is divided into 2 spaces. On each space, place the depicted resources or trees from the bank. For example, here, place 4 coal, but leave this space empty. Here, place 3 wood. And on this tile, place 3 coal on this space and 2 trees on this space. This icon indicates a steam core, which are very valuable. If a tile shows an amount of food, that will be added later in setup. Take the expedition cards and separate them into stacks A, B and C, shuffling each stack separately and placing them nearby. Some scenarios will tell you to remove certain cards from these decks, but for our scenario we're using all of the cards. Take the top 3 cards from the A deck and place them face up along the right side of the map to form the expedition display. Take the technology cards and remove any not used in your chosen scenario. For our scenario we need to remove the Steam Hubs card. Shuffle the remaining cards and choose 4 at random, placing them face up along the edge of the map to form the technology display. Place a development token on each card inactive side up, and return the rest of the technology cards to the box. Choose one of the society cards and your chosen difficulty level. For your first game, it's recommended to choose the Society 1 card and the normal difficulty. This card indicates the starting number of citizens, resources and so on, which will be added later in setup. Place the population board nearby. On the population track, place the citizen markers on the corresponding spaces as per the Society card. For Society 1 Normal, you begin the game with 22 workers, 12 engineers and 8 children. Place the sickness markers for each type of citizen syringe side up on the space according to the Society card. For our Society, all markers are placed on space 0. Nobody is sick yet. The Society card also indicates how much food you start with. Place the food marker on the corresponding space of the food track. If you revealed any map tiles earlier that depict a food bonus, add that food now. In our setup, we revealed 2 tiles, each of which with 3 food, so we start the game with 6 more food. Place the hunger marker on space 0 of the food track. Nobody is hungry yet. Place the supply board nearby. The Society card tells you how many people have died before the scenario begins, in our case 1. Place the corpse marker on the corresponding space of the corpse track. Place the starting number of wood, coal and steam cores from the bank onto the supply board as shown on the Society card. For Society 1 normal, you begin the game with 4 wood, 5 coal and no steam cores. For each type of citizen, place a number of meeples onto the supply board based on the position of the corresponding citizen marker on the population track. This is shown in the bar above the section where the citizen marker is. For example, for Society 1 normal, you start with 22 workers, which gives you 5 worker meeples, 12 engineers, which is 3 engineer meeples, and 8 children, which is 2 children meeples. Each meeple represents a group of people and not just one person. If you start with any automatons, place them from the bank onto the supply board too. For Society 1 normal, you don't start with any of these. Place the spent citizen tokens beside the supply board. Anything on the supply board represents what you currently have available to you and is referred to as the supply, and it's shared by all players. You'll spend wood from the supply to construct buildings, use coal from the supply to fuel the generator, and so on. Place the buildings board nearby. Take all of the buildings and sort them by type. Remove any not required for your chosen scenario. Any building with this icon in the top right is only used in a specific scenario. So for our first one, all of these can go back in the box. From those remaining, place all of the ones without an icon in the top right on the building board on their corresponding spaces as shown. Most buildings are double-sided. Ensure that you place them with the non-upgraded side face up. The workshop and factory are exceptions to this as they cannot be upgraded, so they are the same on both sides of the tile. And for the shelters, the tents, bunkhouses and houses, the other side is ruins. Place the child shelter near the building board. With it, place the 4 faith/order buildings. These are double-sided with the faith building on one side and the order building on the other. These buildings cannot be built at the start of the game but may be needed later. Place any remaining buildings to one side. They will be needed later in setup. Place the Hope and Discontent board nearby. Place all of the Discontent tokens into the Discontent bag and mix them up. Then draw a number of tokens from the bag indicated by the Society card, placing them on the leftmost spaces of the Discontent track. The number before the slash indicates how many tokens to draw, and the number after the slash indicates how many of these tokens to place active side up. Then do the same with the Hope bag. For Society 1 normal, you draw 2 tokens and place them both active side up. Place the Round and Morning board nearby and place the round marker on space 1 of the round track. Shuffle the morning cards and place them face down on the indicated space to form the morning deck. Place the storm marker on the appropriate space as determined by your chosen scenario. For our starting scenario, the storm marker is placed on space 9. Take the lore cards and separate out the ones with the ID codes L01 to L08, shown in the bottom of the card. Place them face up in a pile nearby. Shuffle the remaining lore cards and choose 4 of them at random, placing them with the other 8 lore cards. These 12 cards are the possible lores that can be introduced during the game. You're allowed to look through them at any time. Return any unused cards to the box. Go through the 4 additional lores chosen to check if any of them mention any additional buildings other than what is already on the buildings board. For example, the Fighting Arena lore mentions the Fighting Arena building. Place those buildings near the buildings board along with the Child Shelter and the Faith/Order buildings. At this point, you can remove any of the remaining buildings you don't need back to the box. Take the lore consequence cards, which have the purple background, and place them face down near the lore cards. Do not shuffle these cards. Place the Dusk board nearby. Take the Dusk cards with the red background and find card D000, which is the Inevitable. Place it face down on the middle space of the Dusk board. Keep the rest of the Dusk cards to one side for now. They will be needed later. Do not shuffle them. Take the Social Dispute cards, which are the ones with the yellow background, shuffle them and place them face up on the rightmost space of the Dusk board. The top of these cards is your first Social Dispute card, so you should read it so that you know what to expect when it comes out. After reading it, flip it face down and shuffle it with the Inevitable card to create your initial 2-card Dusk deck. Place the Generator board nearby. Place the Heat marker, this side up, on the first space of the Heat track. Place the 3 heat range indicators on the spaces of the Generator track like this. Place the Cold marker on the 5th space of the Heat track. Take the weather cards and remove any cards not used in your chosen scenario. For the first scenario, use all of the weather cards. Shuffle them and place them face down on the Generator board to form the weather deck. Each player chooses one of the advisor cards. Return any advisor cards not chosen to the box. If playing solo, also take the Call to Rise card in addition to your chosen advisor. Take the citizen cards and remove any not used in your chosen scenario. For the starting scenario, use all of the citizen cards. Shuffle the cards and place them face down as the citizen deck. Each player then draws a number of cards into their hand based on the number of players. Each player looks at the cards in their hand and must choose one of them to be discarded. To discard a card, you must pay the starting cost of the card shown in the top right. For example, to discard Rufus, you must add 3 stress cubes to the stress track on the generator board. If you cannot pay the cost, you cannot discard the card and must choose a different one instead. In the rare case that you are unable to discard any card because none of the starting costs can be paid, you must discard any one card from your hand, ignoring the cost, but instead you gain 1 6 citizen of the type matching the card that you discarded. Discarded cards are placed face up next to the citizen deck. For example, in a 3-player game, each player draws 5 citizen cards. John decides to discard Paul Unklestone, removing 2 coal from the map. Elizabeth discards Adele Kwapinski, increasing hunger by 3. And Luke discards Philippa Bulsky, removing 1 wood from the supply. So in a 3-player game, each player starts the game with 4 citizen cards in their hand. Note that this starting cost on a citizen card is only ever needed at this point in the game. After setup, that part of the card can be ignored. Place the phase tracker card nearby with the phase marker on the action phase space. Take the scenario cards for the chosen scenario and place them in the scenario display along one edge of the map. For the first scenario, place scenario card 1/S01 face up and the rest of them face down. Read the face up card carefully. Check the scenario card for any scenario triggers indicated by green icons. For our scenario, there is a trigger on rounds 4 and 11. Place scenario trigger tokens on the appropriate spaces of the round track. Place the stockpile markers near the scenario display. Place the storm card for your chosen scenario face down to the left of the weather deck. For our scenario, use scenario card 1/S08 as the storm card. Give each player the responsibility sheet according to their advisor card. If playing with fewer than 4 players, distribute the remaining responsibility sheets between the players as evenly as possible. All responsibility sheets must be in play. In the solo game, take all of the responsibility sheets. The responsibility sheets divide the main aspects of the game into 4 areas. You should fully understand how the aspects of the game detailed on your sheet work. This will help players learn the game, as they only have to learn the rules for the parts of the game that they have responsibility for. Give the leadership marker to a player chosen at random. As an alternative to having the generator in the middle of the map, you can place it off to one side where it isn't in the way. If you do, flip the generator tile to the other side and use it to store the meeples and resources you have in the supply. Also, flip the supply board to the other side. With setup complete, you're now ready to play the game. The game is played over several rounds, with each round divided into 9 phases carried out in order. Use the phase marker to track which phase you are currently in. Note that in the first round of the game, you skip phases 1 to 5 and start playing in the action phase. In the dawn phase, the leadership marker passes to the next player and you advance the round marker, which may trigger an event. In the morning phase, you will resolve the top card from the morning deck. In the generator phase, citizens may become sick because of the cold, and then you check for generator stress. In the weather phase, you resolve the top weather card, which advances the heat range indicators. Then, hunters' huts provide food, expeditions make progress, and the storm gets closer. In the preparation phase, you use the ability of an advisor card and resolve the effects of the sick. In the action phase, players take turns to place meeples and perform actions. In the Dusk phase, resolve the top card of the Dusk deck. In the Hunger phase, resolve the effects of the hungry people from the previous day, and then feed your citizens. In the Night phase, choose who gets to sleep in heated shelters. Citizens with nowhere warm to sleep will get sick. I'll explain these phases in a lot more detail later in the video. Frostpunk is a challenging game. To win, you must complete the goals of the scenario, which is detailed on the scenario cards. However, you sometimes don't know what the final goal of a scenario will be until later on. For example, for scenario 1, your initial objective is to build a beacon before round 4. But as you can see here, even if you don't do that, the scenario continues down a different path. And despite there being only one way to win, there are 6 ways in which you can lose. I'll briefly mention them now, but these will be fully explained later. If the last hope token is removed from the hope track, the people lose their will to survive. If a 6th discontent token is added to the discontent track, the people banish you from the city. If the generator breaks down for a second time, it explodes. If any of the sickness markers is on space 26 or higher in the preparation phase, you lose from overwhelming sickness. If, during the hunger phase, the hunger level is 25 or more after spending food to decrease hunger, you die from starvation. And if the corpse marker ever moves to the last space of the corpse track, you lose from overwhelming deaths. In Frostpunk, the board game, players need to work together to win. Whenever a decision needs to be made in the game, if players cannot agree, the player with the leadership marker has the final say. During the game, you'll be instructed to gain, lose, or spend certain things. The difference between losing and spending is that when you lose something you don't have, you just lose what you can. For example, if an effect causes you to lose 3 wood from the supply, and you only have 1 wood, just lose the 1 wood. Spending, however, requires you to actually pay the thing listed, and you must pay the full amount in order to resolve the effect. So in the previous example, if you needed to spend 3 wood to use an ability, and you only have 1 wood, you cannot use that ability. Food is tracked with the food marker, and whenever you gain food, move the marker to the right. Whenever you spend or lose food, move it to the left. The 3 citizen markers indicate how many citizens of each type you have. Whenever you gain a citizen, move the corresponding marker to the right. And whenever you lose citizens, move it to the left. The number of sick citizens you have is tracked with the 3 sickness markers. Whenever you gain a sick citizen, move the corresponding sickness marker to the right. Whenever you cure a citizen, move it to the left. If you are ever instructed to gain a citizen or a sick citizen and the type is not specified, you may choose the type. Wood, coal, steam cores, and in some scenarios steel are known as resources. When you gain them, take them from the bank and place them in the supply. When you lose or spend them, take them from the supply and place them back in the bank. Even though you skip phases 1 to 5 in the first round of the game, for the purposes of this video I'm going to explain them in the order in which you would normally perform them. Just remember that in round 1 you start in phase 6, the action phase. At the start of the dawn phase, the leadership marker is passed to the left. The current leader makes the final decision on things if the group cannot agree. Then move the round marker 1 space forward on the round track. If the round marker reaches a scenario trigger token, remove the token and refer to the scenario cards to see what happens next. For example, in the first scenario, when the round marker reaches 4, the scenario card asks you whether you have built the beacon or not. Note that if the round marker ever moves onto the space with the storm marker, do not resolve the storm just yet. That will be done in the weather phase. Later in the game, I'll explain how you can start researching technologies. When you do, you will place a development token on the round track. And when you move the round marker, if it reaches a development token, the technology currently being researched is developed and the token is removed. I'll explain this in more detail later on. At the start of the morning phase, reveal the top card from the morning deck and read through it. If the card has an instant effect, such as this one, resolve that now. There may also be some numbered options. Choose one of these options and resolve its effects. If an option has any red text, it indicates a prerequisite condition. And you can only choose this option if you meet that condition. So here you can only choose option 1 if you have active justice, which is a type of hope token. After resolving the card, remove it from the game if the chosen option shows this icon. Or if it shows this icon, place the card in the event display. Some cards in the event display have actions on them, which I'll explain later. At the start of the generator phase, you may spend coal to fuel the generator. This increases the amount of heat that it's providing. Normally, you would be spending coal to fuel the generator during the action phase of the previous round, but this is one final chance to do it before working out who got sick from being too cold yesterday. Fueling the generator is an important part of the game, and you can do it at the start of the generator phase, during the action phase, and during the night phase. The rules are always the same, so I'll explain it now. To fuel the generator, spend any number of coal, moving it from the supply to the bank, and advance the heat marker 1 space for each coal spent. You can move the heat marker onto the cold marker, but not beyond. The position of the heat marker with respect to the heat range indicators will be explained more when I discuss the action phase, but for the generator phase, the only thing that matters is the number of spaces between the cold marker and the heat marker. For each of these spaces, 1 citizen of the corresponding type gets sick. For example, here, 1 worker and 1 child get sick, so you advance the sickness markers for both the worker and the children by 1 space. As you might guess, having people get sick is bad, so why not just fuel the generator enough to avoid it? Well, first of all, your supply of coal is limited, so you need to balance that with your sickness. But also, the more you fuel the generator, the more stress you put it under. After working out who gets sick, take a number of coal cubes from the bank as shown to the left of the heat marker. Here you would take 3 cubes. Drop the cubes into the top of the generator. Then carefully pull out the generator drawer, remove any cubes and slide the drawer closed. Place the removed cubes on the stress track, starting with the 10 small spaces. Once those spaces are full, place any remaining cubes into the large overflow space at the top of the track. Then reset the heat marker by moving it back to the first space of the heat track. You need to refuel the generator each round. Cubes on the stress track are known as stress cubes, and they represent how much strain there is on the generator. If there are any stress cubes in the overflow space, the generator breaks down. The first time this happens, perform the following 3 steps. Return all stress cubes from the stress track, including those on the overflow space, back to the bank. Flip the heat marker to the overheated side. Then advance the cold marker 1 space, and all 3 heat range indicators 1 space too. The second time the generator breaks down, it explodes and you lose the game. In the weather phase, reveal the top card from the weather deck and resolve the 4 sections on it from top to bottom. First, advance the cold marker and each heat range indicator by the depicted number of spaces. For example here, you move the cold marker up 1 space and the yellow heat range indicator also 1 space. Second, you gain 1 food for each hunting symbol on your hunter's huts. Here you have 1 basic hunter's hut with 1 symbol and 1 upgraded hunter's hut with 2 symbols, so you gain 3 food. Third, if you have any active expeditions, advance each of your scouts the indicated number of spaces forward. I'll explain expeditions more later in the video. And finally, move the storm marker backwards on the track the indicated number of spaces. After moving the storm marker, if it is now on or before the space with the round marker, a storm hits your settlement. When this happens, reveal the storm card and resolve its effects. For the starting scenario, the first storm destroys all tents and the second one destroys all bunkhouses. At the start of the preparation phase, you may choose to use the ability of one of the advisor cards that you have in the game. To do so, you must exhaust the indicated hope token. I'll explain more about hope and discontent later, but essentially exhausting a hope token means flipping it from the active side to its exhausted side. If you're playing solo, now is the time that you need to decide if you are going to use your Call to Rise card, which is a one-use only card that you can use to draw new citizen cards based on how many hope tokens you currently have. Next, check the sickness markers. If any of them are on space 26 or higher, you immediately lose the game due to overwhelming sickness. Otherwise, resolve the effects of each sickness marker on the population track from lowest to highest. For each sickness marker, resolve the effect depicted below the section that the marker is in. If there are fewer than 5 sick citizens of the type being checked, there is no effect. If there are between 5 and 9 sick citizens, you resolve this effect. Between 10 and 14, this one, and so on. This icon means that you flip the sickness marker over. When a marker flips to the skull side, that represents that one of the sick citizens is now gravely ill and close to death. If a sickness marker is ever flipped from the skull side back to the syringe side, a citizen dies. Both the citizen marker and the sickness marker are moved backwards 1 space. I'll cover citizen deaths more later in the video. This icon means that you need to place a spent citizen token into the supply of the type corresponding to the sickness marker being resolved. This represents that one of the meeples is too sick to work for that round. For example, you have 23 workers, 18 of whom are sick. You place 2 worker spent citizen tokens in the supply. You then flip the sickness marker twice. The first time to the skull side and then back to the syringe side, which means one of the workers dies. The action phase is where the majority of the game takes place, where players take turns in using the available meeples to perform actions. It's also the first phase for round 1, since phases 1 to 5 are skipped in the first round of the game. At the start of the action phase, first check that you have the correct number of meeples in the supply. This is based on the position of the corresponding citizen markers on the population track. For example, here you should have 5 worker meeples, 4 engineers and 3 children. Note that any meeples on expeditions count towards this total. Then, if there are any spent citizen tokens in the supply, place a corresponding meeple onto each of them. You may want to lay the meeples down so it's clearer. These meeples cannot be used to perform actions for the rest of this phase. Also, you cannot use child meeples to take actions unless a specific law has been introduced or another effect allows you to do so. Beginning with the player with the leadership marker and going clockwise, each player takes a turn during which they choose an available meeple in the supply and perform an action with that meeple. Play continues in this way until you run out of meeples or do not want to take any other actions. There are 6 possible actions that you can perform, summarised on the back of each responsibility sheet. However, the Deploy Scouts action can only be performed after the beacon is built, and the Special action can only be performed if there is a special action available. So, at the start of the game, there are only 4 actions to choose from. The same action can be performed more than once each round. Before explaining the actions, I wanted to talk about a very important concept in the game, which is whether an action is heated or cold. If you perform an action that is heated, everything is okay, but if you use a meeple to perform an action that is cold, one citizen of that type gets sick. Of the 6 possible actions, the Remove Snow action is always cold, so it doesn't matter how much you fuel the generator, anyone performing that action will get sick. This is depicted by the syringe icon on the action space for removing snow. Conversely, the Construct action, Deploy Scout, and performing a special action are always heated. You can do those actions safely no matter how much you have fueled the generator. The remaining 2 actions, Gather Resources and Use a Building, are either heated or cold depending on whether the generator is providing enough heat. This is determined by the position of the heat marker with respect to the heat range indicators. The yellow, orange and red indicators relate to the insulation level of the building, which can be seen on the building tile. And the other 3 indicators relate to the distance that the space is from the generator. This indicates spaces on the generator tile itself. This one indicates the generator tile and all spaces adjacent to it, and this one indicates the generator tile and all spaces within 2 hexes of it, which, for this map setup, is the whole map. To determine if the Gather Resources and Use a Building action is heated or cold, draw an imaginary line across from the position of the heat marker. For the zone symbols, anything below the line is heated, and anything above the line is cold. For the building symbols, any buildings with an insulation level below the line is heated no matter where the building is on the map. Anything above the line is cold unless the zone in which the building is in is heated. For example, the heat marker is on space 3. It is above the red and orange heat range indicators, meaning that all red and all orange buildings are heated no matter where they are on the map. Yellow buildings are cold unless they are in a heated zone. The heat marker is above the first 2 zone-related indicators, meaning that all actions carried out on the generator tile and all tiles adjacent to it are heated, no matter what the insulation level of the building is. So here, if you gather the wood from this space here, it is heated, because the zone it is in is heated. But if you were to gather the coal from this space here, it would not be heated and the citizen would get sick. Also, if you use the building action of this hunter's hut, it is heated. Even though it only has yellow insulation level, it's in a heated zone, so the insulation level doesn't matter. However, if you were to use the action of this hunter's hut, it is outside the heated zone and only of yellow insulation, so it's cold. And if you use the action of the workshop, although the zone it is in is not heated, the building has a red insulation level, so the action is heated. Essentially, a building is heated if it's either in a heated zone or if its insulation level is heated. Either or is okay. Now this is one of the most important concepts of the game to understand, so if it isn't quite clear, I would pause the video now and check out the other examples in the rulebook until it makes sense. Every single time you perform an action, just before carrying out that action, you may fuel the generator in the same way as I described earlier, spending any amount of coal from the supply to move the heat marker up 1 space for each coal spent. The first action I wanted to explain is Remove Snow, which you perform by choosing a meeple from the supply and placing it onto the Remove Snow space here. As indicated by the syringe icon, this action is always cold, so 1 citizen of the type you sent to remove snow will get sick. Then choose one of the following 2 options. Either take 2 near tiles or 1 far tile. Near tiles must be placed adjacent to the generator tile, but they do not need to be placed next to each other. Far tiles must be placed at least 2 hexes away from the generator tile and must connect through to the generator tile by a path of other tiles. So here is okay, but here is not okay. Once the tiles have been placed, flip them face up and populate them with resources and trees just like you did in setup. If a revealed tile has a food bonus on it, gain that food now. The next action to explain is gather resources, which is performed by choosing a meeple in the supply and placing them on one of the spaces of the map that contains wood, coal or steam cores. After placing the meeple, take up to 2 resources from the space and place them in the supply. At this point, I just wanted to explain the definition of a space, since I'll be using that term a lot. Each map tile consists of 2 separate spaces. The generator tile has 5 spaces. In our scenario, these 2 spaces start off empty. This one has wood, this one coal, and this one the cookhouse. Note that this area here is not a space, as this is where the generator drawer goes. You can only gather resources from a space which is unoccupied. That means there is no meeple already there. Therefore, you can only gather from each space once per round. But remember, each hex has 2 spaces, so you could gather the 2 wood here with 1 action, and then the 1 wood here with a different action. The third action to explain is construct, which you perform by placing a meeple on this space here. The construct action is always heated, so nobody gets sick from doing this. When you perform the construct action, you carry out 3 construct sub-actions. Each sub-action can be used to either build a new building or dismantle an existing building. To build, choose a building from the buildings board and pay the cost depicted in the circle at the bottom of the corresponding column. This is a combination of wood and, for columns 4 and 5, a steam core too. Printed below the circle is the upgrade cost, which I will explain later. You can also build tents for 2 wood each, bunk houses for 3 wood each, and houses for 4 wood each. Alternatively, you may choose a building below the buildings board, but only if it has been unlocked by a card, and the cost to build the building is shown on that card. After paying the cost, place the building on a space of the map that does not contain a meeple or another building. You are allowed to build on a space with resources or trees, but if you do so, those things are lost. Return the resources and trees to the bank. Note that the large buildings take up both spaces on the same tile. You cannot build them across 2 different tiles. The other sub-action is to dismantle an existing building. To do this, choose a building on the map without any meeples on it and place it back onto the buildings board. You get no resources back for this. Buildings with this icon cannot be dismantled. If you don't get any resources back from dismantling a building, then why do it? Well, because the building might be of no longer use to you and you might need the space for something else. The fourth action to explain is use a building. To perform this action, place an available meeple onto a building on the map, either one of the starting buildings or one that you have constructed. Each small building can only have 1 meeple on it, and each large building can have up to 2 meeples on it. That is, each round you can perform the action of a large building twice. This action is either heated or cold depending on the position of the markers on the generator board as described earlier. Some buildings depict this icon. This means that you can only send an engineer to perform the action of the building, not a worker. The action of each building is fully described in the appendix at the back of the rulebook. I'm not going to cover all of them in this video, although I will explain a few of them later on. The next action to explain is deploy scouts. This action can only be taken once the beacon is built. When you perform this action, take a worker or engineer from the supply and place it on the bottom space of an expedition card that doesn't already have a meeple on it. That meeple is now a scout and will move during future weather phases. There can only be 1 active expedition at any time until the beacon has been upgraded, at which point there can be 2 expeditions. Don't worry, I'll explain about upgrading buildings later, and I'll also explain about expeditions in their own chapter later in the video. The final action to explain is the special action, which can only be performed if there is a scenario card or event card with an action printed on it. Unless noted otherwise, performing a special action is always heated. To perform this action, place an available meeple onto the action area of the card. Each special action can only be performed once per round, and some of them even only once per game. Some cards require you to spend food or resources to perform the action. Others require you to place resources on the card. Each card has an effect depending on its text. This one, for example, is all about providing better conditions for the sick. When it comes into play, you add card D007 to the Dusk deck, and from then on, you can perform the action on the card once per round by sending a meeple to the card and placing wood and coal on it. The impact of how many resources you sent will be resolved if and when card D007 is revealed. At the start of this phase, if there are any cards in the scenario display or event display that have effects with Dusk phase on them, such as this one, resolve them now. Then shuffle the Dusk deck, reveal the top card and read its text. In a similar way to the morning cards I showed earlier, there may be an instant effect and also some numbered options to choose from. The card is then either removed from the game if it shows this icon, or placed in the event display if it shows this icon. If a card doesn't have either of those icons, for example the inevitable card, it is placed in the discard pile. Cards in the discard pile will be reshuffled back into the Dusk deck at certain times, so the card could appear again. At the start of the game, your Dusk deck only contains 2 cards, the inevitable card and your starting social dispute card. However, as the game goes on, more cards will be added to the deck as the result of your choices in the game. Some of those events will be good, some not so good. You could, for example, choose to introduce a law that puts the children to work, but the parents won't be happy about it, and there will be consequences. If the social dispute card is drawn, resolve its effects in order, and then remove the card from the game. Take a good look at the top card from the social dispute deck before shuffling it together with both the Dusk deck and the Dusk discard pile to create a new Dusk deck. There will be exactly 1 social dispute card in the Dusk deck at any time. The first thing to do in the hunger phase is to feed the people who were hungry from the previous round, represented by the position of the hunger marker. If the hunger level is 1 or higher, you must spend food to decrease that hunger as much as you can. If you manage to reduce the hunger level to 0, all is good. However, if after spending food there are still hungry people, something bad happens. If the hunger level is now 25 or higher, you lose the game immediately. Otherwise, resolve the effects of the section below where the hunger marker is. Here you increase discontent, which I'll explain later in the video. Here you increase discontent and a citizen dies, and so on. When a citizen dies from hunger, you don't get to choose which one. Look at the top of the column for the previous round, i.e. one of the people who went hungry yesterday. This tells you which type of citizen dies. So, if it's currently round 6 and a citizen dies from starvation, it is an engineer who dies. After resolving the effects of hunger, move the hunger marker back to position 0 of the food track. Finally, it's time to feed your citizens. Look at the top of the column corresponding to the current round. That tells you which type of citizen gets fed today. Then spend 1 food for each citizen you have of that type. For example, in round 2, the type of citizen is engineer. If you have 12 engineers, you must spend 12 food. If you do not have enough food, move the hunger marker 1 space forward for each missing food. If the hunger level increases to more than 25, flip the hunger marker over to the 25 plus side. You don't lose the game immediately at this point, you have until the hunger phase of the next round to deal with it. In the night phase, you need to provide somewhere warm for your people to sleep, otherwise they will get sick. First, for each spent citizen token that has a meeple on it, return the token to the bank. Any spent citizen tokens without meeples on them remain. These tokens will affect the number of meeples you have available in the next round. Then, return any meeples placed during the round back to the supply. Except for any scouts, they remain on their expeditions. You now need to determine how many heated shelters you have for people to sleep in. Tents, bunkhouses and houses are all classed as shelters, and each of them provides a home for 2 citizens to sleep in, but only if they are heated. If required, you can fuel the generator at this time to provide more heat. Determining whether a shelter is heated or not is done in the same way as described earlier, and is a combination of the position of the heat marker, the heat range indicators, the zone the shelter is in, and the insulation level. For example, you have a total of 9 meeples to provide shelter for. You have 2 tents, 2 bunkhouses, along with the child shelter, which is a special building that can only be constructed once you have introduced a specific law. The current position of the heat marker indicates that everything within 1 tile of the generator is heated, as well as everything with an insulation level of orange or red. So both of the bunkhouses and the child shelter are heated because they have a good enough insulation level. It doesn't matter where they are on the map. This tent here is heated because of its location, but this one here is not. I don't know whose idea it was to build a tent all the way out here, but it was a bad one. The child shelter has 4 spaces, but only for children, so that is the 2 children meeples sorted. Of the others, you only have space for 6, and you decide which ones have a warm bed to sleep in for the night. Let's say you choose the 3 engineers and 3 of the workers. For each meeple with nowhere warm to sleep, you gain 1 sick citizen of the matching type. When a storm hits, some of your shelters will get destroyed and flipped over. These ruins cannot be used as a shelter during the night until a specific law has been passed. Now that I've covered the rules for the 9 phases of the game, it's time to go into some more detail about some of the other concepts of the game, and the first one being hope and discontent. As shown in setup, you track the level of hope and discontent on this board. Tokens will be drawn from the bag and placed on the corresponding track. Tokens showing their dark side are exhausted, and those showing their light side are active. There are 3 types of discontent token and 3 types of hope token, and there are 3 of each type in the game. If you ever gain a 6th discontent token, whether any of them are active or not, people banish you from the city and you lose the game immediately. And if you ever lose all of your hope tokens, the people lose their will to survive and you also lose the game. Whenever you're instructed to activate a token, flip an exhausted token to its active side. And whenever you are instructed to exhaust a token, flip an active token to its exhausted side. If you're ever instructed to activate or exhaust a token and are unable to do so, simply ignore that effect. However, if you are required to exhaust a token in order to resolve an effect such as this one, you can only do that effect if you exhaust a token. During the game, you will be sometimes instructed to increase or decrease hope or discontent. This is represented on the cards in one of 2 ways. This effect here, for example, tells you to increase discontent, whereas this effect is to decrease hope twice. On the law cards, this is represented by coloured circles. So here, if you introduce this law, you decrease hope and increase discontent. Whenever you increase hope or discontent, you have 2 options. You can either draw a random token from the corresponding bag and place it exhausted side up on the leftmost empty space of the appropriate track. Or, instead of adding a new token, you could activate any one exhausted token from the corresponding track. But that's only if no specific type of token is mentioned. Sometimes you will be instructed to increase or decrease hope or discontent and a specific type is listed. For example, the effect of this card tells you to increase apathy, which is a specific type of discontent. In this case, you perform both of the following steps in order. First, you draw a new token from the bag and place it exhausted side up. Then, if possible, you activate any one exhausted token of the type specified. And this is a rule which is a bit tricky to get your head around, because if you're resolving an effect which tells you to increase apathy, then the end result of it might be that apathy does not actually increase at all. To clarify with another example, you are resolving an effect which tells you to increase care, which is a specific type of hope. You draw a token from the bag and place it on the hope track exhausted side up. Then you check all of the hope tokens to see if any of them are care. If there was one, you would activate it, but because there isn't, nothing else happens and therefore care did not actually increase. Whenever you decrease hope or discontent, you also have 2 options. You can either exhaust one active token on the corresponding track, or instead you can remove one already exhausted token from the track. If there were no active tokens on the track, you must choose the second option and remove a token. Another type of effect causes you to discard a token. Discarding a token means removing it from the board, whichever side up it was, and placing it back in the bag. The sickness markers track how many of each type of citizen are sick. Whenever a citizen gets sick, move the sickness marker 1 space forward. Any time in the game that you are instructed to gain a sick citizen and no type is specified, you can choose which type gets sick. It may sound obvious, but there can never be more sick citizens of a type than there are of that type. For example, here there are 15 engineers and all of them are sick. If at this point you're instructed to gain a sick engineer, then instead of moving the sickness marker, you flip it over. And if you remember back to the preparation phase, you may be also flipping over these markers based on how many sick people you have. When a marker flips from the syringe side to the skull side, this represents that one of the sick citizens is now gravely ill, but there is no additional game effect. However, if a marker is ever flipped from the skull side to the syringe side, that means the gravely ill citizen has died. When someone dies, either from a sickness marker flipping from the skull side to the syringe side or some other way, you also have a few more steps to perform. First, move the corpse marker 1 space forward. If it reaches the end, you lose the game from an overwhelming number of deaths. Then, move the citizen marker back 1 space to represent the person who died, and if they died from flipping the sickness marker, move the sickness marker back also. Finally, you must resolve the death effect of a citizen card. For this, you have 2 options. Any player may choose to discard a citizen card from their hand that matches the type of citizen that just died. If they do, apply the death effect of that card corresponding to the type of citizen who died. For example, if a worker just died, one player could discard this card because it is a worker, and this is the effect that would be resolved. If nobody can or wants to discard a card, then reveal the top card of the citizen deck and apply that death effect instead. So why would you want to discard a citizen card from hand when all of the effects are bad? Although I've not fully explained the citizen cards yet, losing one of them from your hand is indeed bad, but at least you know what the effect will be. Every citizen card in the deck has you decreasing hope by 1 if a worker or engineer dies, or by 2 if a child dies, but many of them have other effects too. So if an engineer dies and you have an engineer card in hand that says -1 hope and nothing else, you might want to discard that card instead of running the risk that the card drawn from the deck is worse. Various game effects such as this one on the medical post allow you to cure citizens. Each point of curing allows you to move any one sickness marker back 1 space. So if you use the medical post, you could for example cure 1 child and 2 engineers. Note that curing a citizen simply moves the marker backwards. If it was on the skull side, that does not change. Also note that you are not allowed to move a sickness marker on its skull side to the 0 space. Another type of game effect allows you to treat citizens, such as the infirmary, which is either cure 4 or treat 2. When you treat a citizen, flip a sickness marker on its skull side to the syringe side without resolving the normal effect of doing this. The platform is a building in every game. Its action requires an engineer and allows you to introduce a new law. To do this, choose an available law from those selected during setup and place it face up in the law display. You can have a maximum of 4 laws, and once introduced, they cannot be changed. As mentioned earlier, you immediately increase or decrease hope or discontent as indicated on the card. Introducing crowded quarters, for example, increases anger. Then remove any other law cards that the newly introduced one is paired with, as indicated in the top right of the card. The starting 8 laws, which are used in most scenarios, are paired together: L1 and L2, L3 and L4, L5 and L6, and L7 and L8. Each of these pairs is mutually exclusive. Once you introduce one of them, remove the other one from the game. So, if you introduce crowded quarters, makeshift shelters is removed from the game. Finally, there are consequences to your decisions that you will have to deal with later, but don't worry, some of those consequences may be good. Every time you introduce a new law, find the 2 law consequence cards that have the same ID number as the law you introduced, and without looking at them in detail, pick one at random and shuffle it into the Dusk deck. It may come out later in the game. If you introduce New Faith or New Order, this unlocks the extra buildings that were placed below the buildings board in setup. Use this side if you introduced New Faith, and this side if you introduced New Order. The cost to build these buildings is shown on the law card. During setup, 4 technology cards were placed near the map, and if you remember back to when I covered the Dawn phase, if the round marker moves onto a space with a technology marker, something happens. So how do you get those tokens onto the round track in the first place? Well, immediately after building your first workshop, you start researching a technology, and this happens as soon as you build the workshop. You don't have to use the building itself. Choose one of the 4 technology cards to start researching and remove the token from it. Take a note of how much time the technology takes to research as shown on the card. On the round track, place the token that number of spaces ahead. When the round marker reaches the token, the technology is developed. Move the token back to the card, but place it active side up, and you can now use that technology card for the rest of the game. You also immediately begin researching another technology, so choose another card and place its token on the round track as normal. Note that building a second workshop does not get you to start researching a second technology. You can only ever have one technology being researched at any time. So why build a second workshop? Well, that will become clear when I talk about the building actions, and I'll explain the workshop. At the start of the game, there are 3 expedition cards in the display. Each of these cards forms what is known as an expedition stack, to which more cards will be added as the game goes on. Once you have constructed the beacon, you can perform the Deploy Scouts action to go on an expedition. As mentioned earlier, when you perform this action, take a worker or engineer from the supply and place it on the bottom space of an expedition stack that doesn't already have a meeple on it. There can only be 1 active expedition at any time until the beacon has been upgraded, at which point there can be 2. During the weather phase, scouts move according to the expedition progress value on the weather card for that round. The number shown is how many spaces each of your scouts can move. And when a scout reaches the last space of the stack, you have a choice. You either explore the location or skip it and continue onwards. The top right of the card gives you an indication of the expected rewards. This icon represents resources, this one represents citizens, and this one could be either. If you choose to skip a location, for example if the expected rewards are not something that you need right now, you draw a new card from the next location deck and place it on top. Make sure that you leave the first space of the original card visible, and then place the scout on the first space of the new card. If the scout had any remaining movement points left, they can continue moving on the new card. For example, you have an engineer scout who has already made some progress on this expedition. The weather card for this round shows that they make 3 progress. You move 1 space to the last space of the current card, but the expected rewards are people, some of whom are probably hungry and sick. You decide to skip the location and place a new card instead. The current card is an A card, so you take the top B card and place it on top. Since you have 2 movement points left over, you already make good progress towards your new destination. Alternatively, instead of skipping the location, you can choose to explore it. When you do this, flip the card you are on over to the other side. If there are other cards in the stack, leave them as they are. Read the text on the back of the card and then choose one of the available options. Each option will either be to continue, indicated by a blue arrow, or to return, indicated with a yellow arrow. If you continue, leave the card black side up and take a new card from the deck as shown below the arrow. Place the new card white side up on top of the stack, leaving the continue option visible on the previous card. You will resolve that effect when you return to the city later. Place the scout onto the bottom space of the new card. If you had any remaining movement points left, they are lost. If, however, you choose a return option, place the scout back in your supply, and then resolve the effect of the current card along with the continue option effect of any other cards in the stack. Then check what is listed below the return arrow. If it says B or C, flip all cards in the stack to their white side, stacking them so that the first space is visible on each card, and then add the new card, either B or C, to the top of the stack white side up. The C cards represent locations as far away from the city as you can travel. When you explore one of these, they have the text New A below the arrow. In this case, remove the entire expedition stack from the game and start a new one with an A card white side up. During setup, each player is dealt a number of citizen cards depending on the number of players in the game. And, as mentioned earlier, before the game starts, each player must choose one of those cards, pay the starting cost as shown in the top right, and discard it. During the game, each citizen card you have can be used for one of 2 things. One of them I've already mentioned, and that is when someone dies, you can discard a citizen card from your hand of the matching type to use the death effect of that card instead of a random one from the deck. But the main use for citizen cards is their main ability shown on the card here. Whenever you're performing an action, you may play one citizen card and use its ability if the type of citizen on the card matches the meeple that you are performing the action with, and the action that you're performing must be listed on the card. For example, if you use an engineer to use the action of the cookhouse, you could play this citizen card from hand when doing so. If you do, the action printed on the card is used instead of the action of the building. The card completely replaces the normal effect of the building. Each action can only ever have one citizen card played for it, and also each player can only play one citizen card per round. It's recommended to leave the card you played face up in front of you to remind you of this, and discard it only at the end of the round. Also note that child citizen cards can be played for their ability, even if you cannot normally perform actions with children meeples. That is, the child labour law does not need to have been introduced for you to play child citizen cards. There are a lot of different buildings in the game, each with their own unique action, and I'm not going to cover them all in this video. They are all fully explained in the appendix at the back of the rulebook. However, I am going to cover the general rules about building actions and then explain a couple of them in more detail. When you first play Frostpunk, even when you know all of the rules, it can be overwhelming to decide what buildings to construct. My advice is just to play, experiment and see what works for you. Buildings come in 5 different colours. The yellow, orange and red ones indicate the insulation level, which I've discussed earlier. Blue buildings have no insulation at all and are only heated if they are within a heated zone. White buildings either have an immediate effect when constructed or an ongoing effect. They have no actual building action, so meeples are never placed on them. Small buildings take up 1 space on a map tile and can be used once per round. Large buildings take up both spaces on the same tile and can be used twice per round. Some of the building actions refer to adjacent spaces. For example, the action of the gathering post is to take one resource from each adjacent space. A great building if you have resources all around it, such as here. A space on a map tile is adjacent to the other space on the same tile, as well as all spaces on map tiles that share an edge. For example, if you use this gathering post, you collect one coal from the other space on the same tile, as well as one coal from here and one from here, one wood from here, and the steam core here. The generator tile is special. It actually has 5 spaces on it. Remember, this area here where the drawer pulls out to is not a space. Spaces on a map tile and the generator tile are adjacent if they share an edge. So going back to the previous example, then using this gathering post would collect one of those coal too. A sawmill can only chop down trees on the same tile as itself, but once it's been upgraded, it can chop down trees on adjacent spaces too. In order to extract the resources from the rim board, you need to build either a wall drill to extract wood or a coal mine to extract coal on the space adjacent to the corner of the rim board with the deposit. Once built, these buildings can be used to extract the indicated amount of wood or coal. I've mentioned upgrading buildings a few times in this video, so it's time to finally explain how you do that. The building action of the workshop, which can only be performed by an engineer, has 2 possible effects, and you do 2 effects, which could be the same one twice or one of each. One of those effects is to upgrade a building, which you do by paying the upgrade cost shown below the circle in the corresponding column of the buildings board. To upgrade a building, flip it to the other side. It now has either a better action or a better insulation level, or both. You cannot upgrade a building that has already been used this round, that is one that has a meeple already on it, but you can upgrade a building and then use it later in the round. If a building's name has diamonds next to it, it cannot be upgraded. This can be seen on all types of shelter, buildings that have already been upgraded, and some other buildings too. The other effect of the workshop is to speed up research. When you do this, move the development token back 1 space on the round track. And if it moves to the current round space, that technology is developed as described earlier. And this is why you might want 2 workshops, because you can use each workshop to really push that research. Another building I wanted to mention is the factory. Once built, the factory can be used to construct an automaton by spending 1 steam core. When you gain an automaton, place it in the supply. You can use it during the action phase as if it was a worker, but you must spend 1 coal to do so. Automatons cannot go on expeditions, and they cannot be used for special actions of event cards that specifically require a worker. Automatons do not count as citizens, do not require food or shelter, and never get sick. They effectively give you extra actions each round with no downside, apart from needing the coal to fuel them. And whatever you do, don't forget the cookhouse. Managing your hope and discontent is very important, and using this building allows you to spend 3 food to either increase hope or decrease discontent. I hope you found this video useful in learning how to play Frostpunk the board game. As mentioned earlier, this game is challenging and you might find winning difficult at first, but stick with it and try again. The more you play, the more you will learn about how to succeed, and your chances of winning will improve on each play. You can also try the same scenario with a different society card. This will give you a different amount of things during setup, and you might find some of them work better for you than others. Please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment. Let me know if you managed to survive the game. And as mentioned at the start, these videos are only possible due to the support of my Patreon campaign. So if you want to support me directly, you can do so at patreon.com/gamingrules. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching.